before Earth, Wind and Fire, before the Beatles, before pretty much anyone, there was Cliff Richard, and there was Cliff Richard and the Shadows. And we were just saying earlier, before John Lennon said, before your single Move It, which I gather was originally a B-side.
Yes, it was.
There was nothing. He said there was no rock and roll.
And God bless him, he said something that I've been able to use when talking to journalists who say, what does it feel like when people say you're not cool? And now I look and say, John Lennon thought that was pretty cool. So I'm happy he said that. He said actually that before Cliff and the Move It, there was nothing. But he didn't mean nothing. I mean, America had everything already, and everything that the Shadows and I did was based. In fact, the Beatles were the same age as us. They just happened to start 5 years later. But had there been no Elvis or Little Richard or Buddy Holly or the Everly Brothers, I don't think there would have been a Cliff Richard. And there wouldn't have been a Beatles, I don't think. There might have been something else, but not the way it turned out. So I'm grateful that I was able to start then and be one of the forerunners in Britain. I wasn't on my own. Marty Wilde was always around, always charting. Billy Fury was in the charts. Dickie Pride. Tommy Steele, apparently, well, not apparently, was the first sort of pop singer. I was still at school when he became famous in Britain. And then but he seemed to find out his niche became theatre, really. I saw him in a show, and this man didn't walk if he could run to the other side of the stage. So he found his own niche. And I just seem to have survived the years, not comfortably, because it's always hard. If you're going to get longevity, and it only struck me on our 10th year. The Shadows and I had broken up a bit before that, but we came together to celebrate 10 years, and we called it Established 58. It was released in 68, but we were established in 58. And I suddenly said to myself, I could remember those early days when in print you'd read, "Here today, gone tomorrow. One-hit wonders."
Yeah.
Suddenly we were 10 years in and doing an album, and I'm thinking, oh, now it seems to me rock and roll can also give you longevity. And what I've discovered is you need to work at it, though. You almost have to work harder. Once you've put yourself in that position of saying, I want to stay around for another 10 years, you have to do everything. You can't just say, I'm making records. You have to go and promote them. You have to go and sing them on stage, and that means you've tripled all the work that you ever have to do. But yeah. I don't look back with any regret. I worked at it, and I have survived. But not survived. Surviving the years is relatively easy. It's surviving, we were talking about this earlier, it's surviving massive, impossible competition.
Yeah, because you've stayed around through, and this is what I find so fascinating, it's sort of like 50s. I think it's, well, this kind of sums it up, like 5 consecutive decades you had a number one hit. When I think about artists in this country, it's sort of like, you've got the longevity of Elton John, but like with a couple more decades. And that, I mean, you're the third, I think you're the third highest selling act of all time or something. Is that
I
right?
got that, yes, I did. And a journalist mentioned it to me and said, are you upset by that? I said, upset? You mean Elvis is number 1 record sales? And Beatles 2, and I'm 3? And remember, I like to say this though, they had the biggest market on the planet for records, which was America.
Yeah.
I didn't. I only had 2 top 10 hits there.
Why do you think that was?
I don't know. I mean, it's easy enough to blame the record company, but I do have to blame them now. The EMI America, when I celebrated my 30th anniversary in Britain, Rupert Perry was the MD of the company, and he threw a big party for me, and they presented me with a gold disc, but made of gold.
Wow.
And I was thrilled with it. And that week, a song called Stronger, from an album called Stronger, was number 16 in the disco dance charts, which is DJ's best favorites. And some people had come into the top 20 of adult contemporary. And I said to him, let's have another go. Let's go back and let's try again. Look, these things are making it by themselves and I'm not even there.
Yeah.
And he said to me, I don't know how to tell you this, but I'm going to say it. EMI America are not excited by Cliff Richard material. You can't really hope to not have anybody behind you in America. America is a massive, huge market. And therefore, I feel I have the right to say this, that they let me down. But now, of course, I love it. I'm 3 to those 2 massive bands, And, well, you can call Elvis a band. And of course, you know, Elvis sold more records after he died.
Yeah, and the Beatles also benefit from that myth because they split up after 8 years, whereas you've kept you know, touring, making records, and not only in certain styles. You know, you've made records. You know, you're a pioneer of rock and roll, but you've made all sorts of things, from dance records to R&B records to many. You know, you've explored many different genres due to your longevity.
I still like. Some people don't like the word pop singer. They seem to think it's a put down. I don't. I'm a pop singer. You know, pop's just short for popular.
Yeah.
And what was popular? If people liked me to sing ballads, I'd do a ballad. You know,
Ballads are awesome. We love ballads.
Absolutely. And I sing out and out rock and roll. I've done Little Richard music, and I did 2 albums that were tributes to what I call the fabulous rock and roll songbook, as opposed to the fabulous American songbook.
Yeah.
And because the music that comes from 8 notes of an octave always fascinates me. How the heck did we write all these songs? There's 8 notes in an octave, and the only thing you can do is go up another octave, which is the same notes but higher. And yet all these songs came out. It was just a fantastic world to be part of, and to think that I was alive when a massive culture change happened. One day it was Frank Sinatra and all that he represented, which was fantastic. These guys really knew what they were doing when they were singing. And then suddenly, bam, there was Elvis. And the rest of us followed. So it was great to feel
like a cultural revolution.
I saw something change, and it was in my lifetime.
And you were a huge part of it, though, as well.
Well, I don't know how huge a part one plays. Once it's been presented like, to me, Elvis, well, he was always my inspiration anyway, but Elvis gave it a face, an attitude, and a shape. And whether you're Michael Jackson or anybody else just followed me, we followed that. What he did is what we all based it on. Michael was different, though. Michael was a really phenomenal dancer. I don't know how that came about, probably because that in the black music sensation that was going on, they moved very, very simply and easily. And I think as a kid, he just did it naturally. And so I found his videos were compulsive viewing. I mean, I would love to have seen him live. I know that he didn't sing everything live, but I wouldn't expect him to. I know what it's like to dance on a video. You're out of breath within 2 minutes. So you choose to see someone who actually presents that rock and roll stuff that you love in a way that no one else did. So I don't know what kind of mark I will leave behind. Longevity, yes. Certain records that I broke.
I mean, some of the records, you know, you're saying that, you know, you weren't that big in the US, but I mean, I've heard 2 of your records for the first time on the radio in the US, like over the last few years. You know, Devil Woman, which is...
Yeah, well, that was one of the hits. We Don't Talk Anymore and Devil Woman.
We Don't Talk Anymore as well was the other one. I heard them all over the radio, as in like multiple times we were listening to this radio station. Smooth 70s on 7 and then 80s on 8 or whatever it was, and we love these radio stations. We're playing them all day. And Devil Woman is on like five or 10 times in a day.
The thing I like about America is that I don't get recognized there. I mean, I know, I appreciate what you're saying. I was in Bloomingdale's in New York once at Christmas time, and my record Whistle-Tone Wine was being played. And I thought, I'm not leaving the store until I've heard my name. I didn't hear it.
Really?
They didn't say who was singing. And
on the radio?
Well, I assume it was. It was playing right through.
It could have been Spotify though, or something. Do you know what I mean?
It could have been, which is
maybe
even worse.
That's why they wouldn't have said
Spotify don't even pay you.
Well,
so the least they could do is tell people who you are.
Well, exactly.
But radio in general, they'll play a mass of records. And sometimes there are DJs that, I don't know whether they insist on doing it, but they do tell you who you just listened to. But very often I've sat in my car waiting, and 6 records go by, and I can't remember the record I heard because it was new to me. And they didn't say it. Now you've got Shazam and all that. I think you can point things up and it tells you who it was. But that's not a way of selling records either. That's a whole different thing. But I just feel that there are records. For instance, along with the one you said, 3rd biggest seller of records, Beatles 2nd, Elvis 1st. In Britain, again, I'm 2nd to Elvis, but Beatles aren't there. It's how many top 10 hits has an artist had. Elvis has more than me. He beat me by about 6. But that still happens. I mean, I was surprised actually that when I was looking into my own record world, and I thought, well, Elvis died really young. And how did he do this? And then of course I look it all up, and he had more hits he sold more records after he died. And
the myth.
Yeah, and of course,
The
I'm not
myth
that
really helps
competitive. I don't want to die to sell records. And now, of course, no one buys records anyway, so I'm going to live forever.
I'm sure you will. Well, it looks like you take great care of yourself. We were talking about that before, but I think whilst people can credit artists simply for their music and things like and for things like tours and making records, it's also the simple fact of staying in the game at this level for as long as you have requires like immense amounts of determination. So is there something that you is there a secret that you can share to your mindset of managing to stay level-headed all the time and always kind of on the train, as it were?
I think level-headedness comes from the environment you come from, like what type of family you had. A lot of people suffer breakdowns of family, and therefore they don't have that balanced effect. My mum and dad, my mum was very keen that I should be singing, and she'd drive me to a singing competition, which I'd lose, and then she'd bring me back, and my dad would say, be careful, if it doesn't happen for you, you can still have a life, So there was this balance. So I feel like if I am balanced, and I feel I am balanced, that it came from them. I wrote a book about 10 years ago, and when I read back, I was making it my own. I got help from Penny Junor, who was a journalist and did a fantastic job. And she said to me, now you've got to make it yours. So I changed everything. And as I went through it and made it sound like me, I realized how much I was talked about my mum and dad. And I always felt close to them, but this actually got to me, the fact that I'd written it, forgotten it, that I'd written it, read it again, and there it was, many, many times, a mention of my father or my mother. So that's a major factor in being level-headed. The other thing is, if you're going to have a career that screams to the top, you either want it to stay there, and if you do, you have to say to yourself, I have to really think about what I do now. I have to work out why it is I've made it here. Should I keep doing this? Dare I go in this direction? You have to be a little daring. Devil Woman was never expected of me. No. Everybody thought that I sang Nothing But Living Doll and Summer Holiday. And I did wait for about a year with this record written by Terry Britton. And then Peter Gormley, my manager at that time, said, why don't you do a record with Bruce Welch of the Shadows? He'll produce it. And Bruce and I decided we would do anything except songs like Congratulations and The Young Ones and Summer Holiday. We'll purposely say, no, we won't do that, because I can always go back to that. So we did an album called I'm Nearly Famous. It had Miss Unites on it, it had Devil Woman on it, and it changed.
It's an awesome record.
But you have to be a little bit daring. But you have to be conscious of why you're there and who put you there. So even now, I read sometimes bands don't want to play their big hits because they want to play the new stuff. Play your new stuff, but between them, play the old stuff that people come for. And but a few years ago, it came to me that the biggest privilege that you have as a successful pop rock singer is that you become part of people's memories. I mean, I've been singing Living Doll on stage a couple of times, and I've seen a guy and a girl in the front row, and as I start, you see him lean over and go like that. And I'm singing, but thinking, she was his living doll. Or they married, and their first baby was their living doll. I'm thinking, oh my God, that's how close you become
part
to
of people's lives, yeah.
So you need to have that in mind as well. If you're wanting longevity and you do have big success, you just have to realize why you're there, who put you there, and try to live up to your standard. And that's not easy to do. And the lack of radio airplay, of course, nowadays is a terrible blow to those of us over the age of 30, and because we used to collect new fans from the radio.
But the thing is, the radio can't control, like in the same way that they could. So there are pros and cons to the current situation, but they can't control in the same way that they could people's tastes. So for example, like I first discovered your music because I heard Devil Woman. I was just like, that is a killer record. I'm now going to start listening to the rest of Cliff Richard's catalog.
What's a killer record?
It is.
But it's hard to do it over and over again. And
it's hard to beat.
It wasn't even.
It wasn't from a radio station, though.
Oh well,
it was from Spotify. I know they don't pay. But
it should be, because radio now narrowcasts. They aim at people. Look, BBC, they've got Radio 1, Radio 2, Radio 3, Radio 4, Radio 5. a friend of mine, Mike Reed, who was a DJ, said, we used to broadcast. So you listen to a radio station, you might not like all of it, but there'd be 30% that you go, oh, fantastic. When we first heard Elvis, it was through a car window, and the car drove off before we knew who it was. We all went back and we listened to American Forces Network, AFN from Germany. Took us days when finally we heard Heartbreak Hotel and it said Elvis Presley. The radio was all there was. Radio and rock and roll were hand and glove. That's how they fitted. Now I know there's many more people singing and making records, but the market's still there if we can only get people to buy the records. And the only way you can do that, even downloading. Why are they going to download a Cliff Richard record when they don't know it's out? Why would anybody punch up Cliff Richard? No. They might, if they hear a song, they can say, put the Shazam on or whatever it is they do, and it says a new record by Cliff Richard, and if they like it, they can, well, they don't buy it though. They stream it.
So the only way now for artists to make any revenue is through touring.
It's on tour, yeah. Streaming is unbelievably bad because, I mean, I was told that we get 0.0008 of a cent. Now my math is not that good, but I don't know how many you'd have to sell to make but
yeah,
$1.
I heard some similar statistics. So for example, if you get a record streamed 1 million times on Spotify, you make £4,000. I mean,
it's not even enough to pay for the next album session.
And it is really hard to get your song streamed 1 million times. It's like it's as hard as like selling nearly as hard as that.
Yeah.
And you're getting £4,000, and like the amount that it would cost to make that record.
But I wonder what the companies that stream. I mean, they must be making a lot of money because millions of people stream, millions and millions of people stream. There's money somewhere, but it should come down to the artist because in the end, what we're going to stream, and this is what I feel, is going to be all old stuff. I mean, I know what it costs. Even now, we battle with record companies to try and get a budget to make an album. And my last album, Rise Up, got gold just before Christmas. And it's one of the fastest selling albums I've had for years. It sold 120,000 in 3 months. Normally that would take a year to do.
I mean, that's really incredible statistic, given how few people buy records now.
That's right, it's a gold record for 100,000. My other gold records, I had to sell 1 million, and I have 14 of them. And they don't count as the majority of my record sales. 14 million? No, that's not a high price. I've sold 300 million records. So it's the other records that made it. It's the other lower parts in the top 20 being in the top 10. I met with Daniel Bedingfield. I loved his stuff. He's not done anything for a long time, but he was so good he should still record. But there again, I don't know how they do it. If you can't sell your records, why record?
Yeah.
But
and if you can't tour,
yeah, I know.
Because you've got, I mean, the thing that you will always be around because you've built that fan base, and you know,
I can be, but I have to. I'm very conscious.
You still work at it.
You have to work at it, but I'm also very conscious that I can't draw the same number of people that I used to, for whatever reason. I mean, we're all dying, for instance, you know. So I'm assuming that many people that were around 40 years ago, 60 years ago, may not be with us anymore. So I have to be, and I'm prepared. I'm quite happy to say I can't do what Pink is doing at the moment, or, but for instance, for my generation, even though they started 5 years after me, the Rolling Stones are still probably the biggest selling touring band.
Touring band, yeah, they're huge.
Ever, it's fantastic. So there's still some people can do it, but I don't think I can do that. Even though, you know, as you say, I do have
still touring a lot and playing huge places.
I have a place in the music world. I'm going to tell you about Daniel. Daniel actually said to me, "How many gold discs do you have?" I said, 14. And he said, "Is that all?" I went,
How many does he have?
Well, he had 4, and he said, "And my last one wasn't that good," he said. Anyway, I warned him. I said, "Daniel, it is not a failure to be in the top 10. You know, obviously, if I could be number 1 every time I made a record, do you think I'd give that up? No, I'd do it. All of us plan to be number 1. All of us have to recognize that you don't always make it. The public will decide what they like. And I've been fortunate, as I said, you know, to have had 120 plus records in the top 20 means that I got it right quite a lot of the times. But you can't expect to get to number 1 every time. Unless you are just another singer from X Factor or something. And even with X Factor and some of the singers, they usually
I
get
think
to a
it's
number one with their
once,
first record,
and then,
but it may not continue.
well, they often get dropped by those companies. They're sort of in for one season. It's like a TV, it's just TV really, isn't it?
Well,
it's not really proper pop
Yeah.
and rock stars being cultivated by that.
No, that's
You need to have a totally independent spirit. And so one thing I was going to ask you is, you're very switched on, like, because sometimes people think of rock and roll stars or pop stars, and they think, it's all about being carefree and rebellious, and that's kind of how you started being,
No, I've never
a rebellious.
No, but I mean,
They try to market you like that anyway. But when did you start being competitive? And did you ever, especially at the start of your career, and has this continued where you're thinking, I actually really want to do this. I really want to be successful.
Oh yeah, but my father's
Where
last
did that come
question to
from?
me, I don't know where that came from, other than I loved it so much that I really wanted to do it. My dad said to me, "You really want to do this?" And yes, I really want to do it. He said, "Well, from now on, you're going to have to do your best at being what you want to be." And it's always stuck with me that you have to just do the best you can at any situation, whether it's doing an interview, doing a concert, making a record. My favorite thing to do is make records. And that's slowly being ripped away from us too, because no one buys them. The going into a studio with a bundle of songs and then sitting out with the band and the drummer said, "What am I going to go?" And then slowly, Devil Woman happens. It's fantastic and it'll never leave me. That excitement is never going to be anything but mine, but I may not always be able to present my dreams. And I can't really grumble, because after 60 years I'm still touring and we still sell seats out. And it's a fantastic.
And by the sounds of it, records. I mean, a lot of people would kill for a gold record these days. It's very.
You get a gold record now, but it's for much less than 100,000 albums. Give you a gold record. I got a gold record for.
But doing that at the moment is amazing, because so few people buy records. And would you put that down to your fan base? You've got an incredibly loyal fan base by the sounds of things.
I think it's probably mostly to do with fan base. It shouldn't be like that though, should it?
It should be you're picking up new fans.
Others. I mean, I did an album called Solicious, which wasn't a massive success. I think we went gold with it. And I sang with The Temptations and Frida Payne. It was all fabulous black artists that I'd always admired. And we released the album. And on the day that I was doing a tour, and some of them came with me on that tour, I went out to a coffee shop, and there were a whole bunch of people there in their late teens, early 20s, and they were pretty cool. They didn't make any such sign that they recognized me, but as soon as I got up to leave, they all came rushing over saying, "Oh, Claire, my mum loves you. Are you still making records?" And I said, "Well, my latest record's in the top 10 at the moment, but the fact that you don't know, it's not your fault. If you're not told, if you're not played anything, you won't know anything about me." And that struck me as well, that they didn't know I made records still.
Yeah, I think a lot of the problem is you're competing against songs, and in the streaming era, as you say, people tend to stream the old stuff.
Yeah.
So if you look up Cliff Richard on Spotify, you're immediately presented with just 5 songs. And, anyone with any sense knows that that's just the tip of the iceberg, and people who know about record making or happen to know about your career are going to know that you've been making records till now. But the record companies and the streaming companies don't advertise this.
I know they don't, but they should know.
They should.
That I'm number 3 in the world. I mean, this is ludicrous when you think about it. If streaming is streaming all old stuff, there's a guy that's done he's compiled a book about everything that I've ever recorded, everything. And he said, the startling fact is this: if you started to play your music now and played it for every second of the day, it'll take 2 weeks to play everything that you've recorded. That's going straight through, song to song to song to song to song.
How many songs do you think you've recorded?
Well, he said it was it's over 1,000, I think. I can't remember, but it's some number that's large. But that fascinated me, to think that you see, you don't even think about it when you're in a studio. You think how long I've spent in a studio if it takes 2 weeks to play just the music I've recorded, because you might spend 3 hours making a song, and. But that fascinated me, and again, I'm not grieved by it really. It's just an irritation that I think many of us of a certain age have. That, like Beatles, Elvis, and me, we're the 3 top best-selling artists, and yet I've often gone to look up some of my stuff on iTunes, and it says no results. So I'm thinking, I feel slightly, I'm only 3, and there's nothing wrong with being number 3, I don't think. But somehow
there are
or
quite
another,
a few people who you beat who are pretty good.
but what they don't do now on radio, which is what they should do, those of us who have proven ourselves over and over and over again should be given maybe a priority chance, even if it's to say, we're going to play this record once a day for 2 weeks. And if nothing happens, dump it. But without radio, there isn't anything really for us to do. There's nothing we can do other than go on tour, which is not only tiring, it gets less efficient as time goes by, the audiences get smaller, and everybody that's now selling out 70,000, they're not going to do that in 20 years' time. Be prepared. Just be prepared. It can't be. It won't be like that. I did this track. If you haven't seen it, you must look up YouTube Stronger by Cliff Richard. And I was doing that song. It was a single out at the time. And so I said to the public, I said, look, I can either make this look like a video or I can just sing it to you. And I pretended to toss a coin. I said, okay, start the tape. And then it was tapes in those days.
That's awesome.
Out it came, and the dancers came out, all the dancing. And I liked doing that, but I told them, I let them know that I'm starting a tape, I'm going to mime it. And then you go back to singing live. Yes, I mean, it's inevitable that you sing bum notes. I guess even opera singers must do bum notes. I've noticed opera singers often slide up to notes.
Yeah, but that's part of the humanity and the warmth.
Of course.
And like, you know, you're talking about like someone like Lennon, for example. You know, he's not like an operatic singer, but like rock and roll is meant to be about expression of humanity.
Yes, it is. And that's why I started live with the Shadows. That's what we did. We didn't have the technology to mime on stage. It was out of the question. And slowly we went through, and then I started doing massive productions. And I only stopped doing because my manager came into the rehearsals. He said, look, this is 3 weeks into a 6-week rehearsal period, and you've spent £500,000 or something like that. It was something outrageous. And I went, what? And of course I realized now I had revolving things here and revolving things here, things that came out of things here, lighting that came down onto the and after that tour, I thought to myself, I can't remember what tour it was, but I thought this is outrageous. And so I slowly started to level it all off, and I now have a live band and I'm a live singer again. I sing live on stage, and it's fabulous.
That's what I would want to see.
I think there's also something about the vocal texture that you remove because it's so perfect on record. You know, you don't have any sound, anything other than your breath, and it's not possible to do that live. You can do the same action, sing the same notes, but it will be different. It's brushing against air, it's brushing against light, everything.
It always sounds 10 times better live.
I think so, yeah.
And there's so much more energy, and there's something so cathartic about it.
Yeah.
It's amazing to hear that you're singing with a band live.
Yeah.
Like that's such a great thing to be doing at this stage.
It's the only thing I'll tell you now is that if you are going to sing live, if there's a singer watching, wondering, what I do at rehearsals, once we've got everything rehearsed, I record everything onto what we call a click track.
Yeah.
We have a click track so that our tempos are always, so there's a tick, 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 1, 2, 3, 4. It's so funny how we're always in tempo. So every now and then you get a bad throat. So I said, in fact, it wasn't my idea. It was one of the technicians said, why don't we record your voice now, here, in the rehearsal studio, and then if anything happens, you can mime something. And in fact, so I do that now. It's all there. I hardly use it because the comfort zone is there. But
yeah.
Some people had a note, they always understand. And I lost faith in myself in those notes, and I couldn't do them. So what they did was, I'd be singing, some people, when it came to those 2 notes, they just pushed that recorder in, they always understand, some people cry. So there's always all sorts of ways you can use the technology without cheating too much.
I think it's quite right to use the technology, because people would have done it if it was around in the 60s or the 50s or the 70s.
I can't imagine Elvis miming. I can't imagine Little Richard or Jerry Lee Lewis miming.
But
I can't imagine the Everly Brothers miming.
They may have done if the situation was as it is now. Who knows?
If they had,
It's a difficult situation now. But
yeah,
then you can't really talk like that.
You're right, because you're absolutely right. Because in point of fact, if you're going to go into a big production, it's probably better to mime.
If there'd been camera phones and social media and they had external pressures and everybody else was doing it,
I guess they might have done. But it's just that I can't imagine now. Yes, I mean, I'd like to do a big multi-million-dollar show again. But there are other ways of doing it. I mean, nowadays you can do. I did one show in Manchester, which was a fairly small audience. I don't think it was more than about 2,000 people, but we sang to 90,000 people via cinemas, and that became popular because of classical music, I think, and operas were being shown through cinemas all over the country. So I don't know what happened. They were going to go to New Zealand as well, so maybe more numbers there. So if there's numbers, your budget can go up. So I think with the future for me, it would be nice to do at least one show a year that was outrageously fantastic, but I'd still want to sing live.
Yeah, that would be the best of both worlds.
I think that's part of it. Friends of mine who were not at my concert in Manchester, somewhere down south, said they went to the cinema and they said it was really weird because everyone was in the aisles dancing, like they dance in the shows. And I thought, that is weird. You're watching the movie, like a movie, but they get up and they're part of it. And I'm sure that's the liveness.
That live element of it.
Yeah.
So in terms of, being one of the greatest, musicians of all time, like there's just a sort of a massive material that's very difficult to kind of get to grips with in a way, because you've done so much. And obviously, it's easy to get to the compilations and listen to all the hits. But what I want to know what are the best records that come to your head immediately that are like deep cuts that maybe your biggest fans would appreciate, that casual listeners may not get a chance to get to. What should we go and listen to that you think is like overlooked?
Devil Woman, no, overlooked. Yeah. I mean, any album that had Alan Tarney producing, there was at least 2 or 3 there that I thought these will never be heard, and I'm tempted even now, at this stage of my life, to do a show where I just pick out the songs that I feel
deep cuts show.
There's a song called Joanna, who's written by Chris Eaton, who wrote Reborn on my new album. He wrote Saviour's Day for me as well, and Joanna is a fantastic song. I used to do it live, but it was never a single. It's hard to. I've got so many albums. I can't. If you show me some albums, I point out. Greenlight has some fantastic stuff on it, really good stuff on it. There's one song that Terry Britton wrote that was about our trip to Russia. I can't think of the title. I'm one of these people that needs multiple choices.
You need. Well, yeah, because it's that expansive material. But one thing I can tell you is that I'm going to be going through it all and picking out as well. But I just wanted to hear it from the horse's mouth.
But if a Martian came down, and we all had to present what we were, I'd say play Devil Woman.
I do love that song.
We Don't Talk Anymore is the biggest single I've ever had, and that was written by a friend of mine, Alan Tarney, who used to play bass for me at the time when Terry Britton used to play guitar for me.
And he produced some of your records.
Alan produced 3 albums, I think, maybe 4. Terry produced one, but they were friends of mine and they were in my band. And the trouble is, of course, I claim this without shame, I do recognize talent. I had them in my band, but what I've realized is you can't keep them. They are gifted, and their gifts sometimes spread, like they did with Terry and Alan, into writing. I lost a bass player and a guitarist. Okay, I can find other guitarists, and I have. At the moment, I've got a phenomenal guitarist playing for me. I've got a bass player playing who's wonderful. So, but it amazes me. Even the Shadows, when you think of Shadows, I wanted to be the lead singer of my band that I created. I created that band for me. But they were too good to just be my band, and they had hits. In fact, the very first, in those early days, to get charts, we used to have a publicist, always. And the publicist said, well, a band, I mean, we've never had a sort of English band before. Can you do something on the record? And so it was Apache, the song. And the Apache starts with an Indian drum that goes, dun dun dun, dun dun dun, and it faded away. But I played that drum. So the big story was, Cliff plays on his band's first single, and it worked. It got the publicity going, and then the Shadows became enormous. I mean, absolutely enormous. And we had a great time together because the guys came to see them, and the girls came to see me, and we were always full up.
Yeah. And do you? So nowadays, you just mentioned that you've got your guitarist and bassist. How do you find people for your band? I mean, obviously people will be queuing up to be in your band. So,
well,
but you mentioned you can't keep them.
Yeah, well,
it's part of having longevity, isn't it? Knowing when to move from phase to phase.
Yeah, I was in Portugal this year when my musical director, who's a great keyboard player, my bass player that I've had for 2, 3 or 4 years now used to play for George Michael, and he'd said to me, "Oh look, they're going to do a tribute, and they want the original band. I'm going to have to go." I said, "Please, you have to go." He played for him for 15 years for George, and so he went. And so my keyboard player and my guitarist went, and they auditioned a bass player, and who else did I? Oh, and actually, I was very lucky with my drummer because I had a drummer called Peter May who died not that long ago, and I thought he just had a bad back, to be honest with you. He didn't share it all with me, everything with me, until the last minute, and he had told my current drummer, Andy McLassen, he had said to him, "If anybody gets this job of mine, I'd like it to be you." And I said, "You're kidding, he said that to you?" Because Andy stood in for him while he was ill, when I thought he was being cured. And it turns out that Andy is now my drummer. So that was a very happy accident. I have a fantastic drummer. The bass player that Keith found for me is brilliant. And even the guitarist who's been with me for 3 years replaced another guitarist. And he turns out to be, he is able to play anything. And sometimes I want to shake journalists by the throat and say, I didn't make this for myself by accident. My band is not a band that just plays easy music. It is very hard to find a guitarist or a bass player or a drummer who can play Move It and Living Doll and Miss You Nights and Devil Woman and do outrageous rock and roll from the 60s. Sometimes they just can't do it all. These guys can. So I've struck it lucky again. But I know what I want.
It's very difficult with that recruitment side of it.
Yeah, I mean, I have to do a massive range of types of music. And I've sometimes been described as predictable Cliff Richard, and I'm thinking to myself, no, I'm not. Move It was nothing like Living Doll. Living Doll was nothing like Miss You Nights. Miss You Nights was nothing like We Don't Talk Anymore, which was nothing like Devil Woman. I don't know why they called me predictable, other than my success has been predictable.
Well, I'd be inclined to agree with them.
I wish they'd write that. Although it's not predictable, really. Success can't be predictable. It just either happens or it doesn't.
And it's I think it's a testament to how hard you've worked. And well, Sir Cliff, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for making the time.
Oh well, thank you for being so interested and being so knowledgeable about the whole thing.
Oh, that's my pleasure.
Thank you.